Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
Welcome to episode 12, the last in our season 1 head-to-head matchups, and it is a doozy.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone new to the program, what we do here is match up immortal gods in head-to-head contest for a chance at the ultimate comeback to help this troubled world. And this episode, we have the king and queen of the Greco-Roman gods, Zeus and Hera. So, a bit of a confession, though, here at the top. The Fates did give us Zeus and Hera in a matchup, but actually, they gave us that after our first episode. And Matt and I looked at each other, and we pretty quickly decided that we were not prepared for that jelly.
No.
Not quite.
No.
So, the Fates cannot be denied, only delayed.
That's
so,
right.
Ready or not, that jelly has arrived. This is that episode. So now, if you have followed the show so far and are familiar with our format, you know that this is not the first time that Zeus and Hera have squared off. Far from it.
No.
In our show. In fact, as husband and wife and brother and sister, of course.
Yes.
As well as co-regents, their stories and conflicts are very intertwined. So much so that we decided to change the format just a little bit.
Right.
So our usual order is that one of us will introduce the god, tell them some of their stories, give the background, and then the other host will go. But this time, they're just too intertwined, so we're going to do a little bit more of a back and forth, but then we're going to go on to our same 5 judgment categories. So, as I said, this is the final head-to-head of the season. Next episode will be the start of our season finals and the penultimate episode, where we will narrow down to the final 2 who will square off with all new categories, which we'll introduce next episode to help us make our final decision and get the final Golden Goat winner that we will invite back to help us save the world. So, you had something else you wanted to add before we kick right into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you captured it well. I think we're calling this the regular season finale before the playoffs begin. It does feel like everything's been adding up to this. Zeus and Hera have been delightful co-stars in nearly every episode, but now they really earned this moment to shine together. And it feels right. I mean, their conflict and their love in its strange combination fuels a lot of our stories, many of which we've covered through the season. We'll touch on them lightly, but we'll hear some new material tonight about how some of the stories behind the stories about what makes them such a special couple. And they are something of a package deal, I think, almost inseparable. And yet they deserve the showcase during this regular season finale. So very excited to bring this to you. It's all been building up to this. One note I do want to make is I've been asked by a few listeners, why 12 episodes in the regular season? And, you know, it's a nice, wholesome, roundish number. It felt right for us for a few reasons. Number one, of course, it is the number of the 12 Olympians. You know, we featured many divine beings beyond the Olympians, but the core 12 represents a big number. So we thought that worked. Also, of course, 12 gives us the dozen, so a holy number there. Gives us the 12 cycles of the moon each year. And it forms the formation, of course, as we all know, of the duodecimal system based in 12s, brought to us by the Mesopotamians. They came up with that because there was a way to count to 12 by counting each finger bone in your thumb in order to keep track of things. Now, it did make me think, all due respect to our Mesopotamian forefathers and foremothers, if you had to come up with a way to count with your fingers, of which we have 10, I feel like there was a more natural way of going about that, but they stuck with 12. I don't want to get too deep in it. It's a slippery slope. I don't want to be accused of championing the metric system. I'm going to stick to pounds, ounces, furlongs, fortnights. Thank you very much. But in any case, 12 has been a holy number. It has occasionally been bastardized with the baker's dozen, which of course is 13. And I learned the Texas dozen, which is 15. Because Texas, I guess.
Yeah, because Texas.
Had to be bigger. Yeah. So there's our 12. Let's jump in at last with all the preamble out there. And let's get it going. God versus God, episode 12, Zeus versus Hera. And as always, Andrew, may the best God win.
Yes, indeed.
Now you had a confession at the beginning. I want to make a little quick personal story myself, a quick prelude. I confess, and I don't want to have a bias here, but one of these contestants does have a special place in my heart because of my life story. I think I was raised in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
In that church, we reach confirmation, which of course is the sacramental.
Were you literally in a church?
Yeah. I was in one for years at a time, was never struck by lightning. It happened. But we have the sacramental rite of admission into the church. That's confirmation. It's sort of the entry into adulthood. And Catholics, when they get confirmed, get to choose a confirmation name. So you choose a name that's added to your own name. Very exciting. I considered lots of options. And since I was about, I think 12 or 13 at the time, I made the natural choice and I requested, I'm going to go Zeus. That seemed fitting. I liked the power. I liked just the majesty of the king of the gods. The good priests and the nuns of St. Thomas the Apostle gently but firmly replied that for some reason pagan gods were not eligible for that.
No.
Yeah, so I had to choose a different one. I ended up with Adrian, mainly because I just kind of thought it was a cool name. But I did learn later that St. Adrian happens to be the patron saint of soldiers, so I appreciate that. Also, the patron saint of, and this is true, of prison guards, arms dealers, butchers, and communications phenomena. Now, since I ended up as a communications professional, I feel like this must have been somewhat prophetic. Must have been in the cards. It seems fitting. Perhaps this sets the table for an eventual kind of transition into a second career as an arms dealer.
Yeah, there you go.
So we know prophecies play a big role in this program, and why should they be any different in our real lives? So we'll stop there, hold off additional details for our inevitable spinoff Saint versus Saint.
Yes.
But for now, to leave that part, it is also worth noting the Catholic Church does recognize the feast day of St. Adrian one day a year, and that is the very day we're recording this, September 8th. What do you know about that?
Amazing.
Circle of life.
Fated to be.
Comes together. Yes, right. The fates are resonating wildly with us. So enough about the saints. Let's get to what the good people want to hear about. Let's get to the gods. Let's get to Zeus. So king of the gods, god of lightning, god of thunder, the original god of thunder. Sorry, Thor, but he got here first. And the god of law, order, and justice. Now, that's right. You peel back all the well-known aspects of Zeus, the leadership position among the Olympians, all the lightning and the thunder. He is also the god of both law and order, which I was not aware. Now, you may be aware, Andrew, that in the criminal justice system, that people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups. It turns out Zeus rules over them both. So not only is he one of the 12 original Olympians, the founder of the body, he essentially serves as the chairman of the board. Zeus is on the org chart, one step above everybody, his siblings, his offspring. My dad used to say, everybody has a boss except the Pope. I guess Zeus would end up being the other exception. So does that make Zeus and the Pope kind of colleagues, partners, frenemies? I don't know. Yeah. Dotted line relationship. It's very hard to say. The Roman equivalent of Zeus is Jupiter, also known as Jove, which in my view, way better nickname than Jupe or Jupy, big Jupe. But Zeus is known as the Sky Father, the All Father, the chief of the gods. He's the one who assigned the roles to all the other gods, told them what they're responsible for, called the shots. We know him in that primary symbol of the thunderbolt. And as we've heard throughout this season, that's his go-to weapon in any number of circumstances in battle to settle personal matters. The thunderbolt is definitely his go-to. Yeah. Also seen surrounded by the eagle for reasons we'll hear about a little bit later, the bull and oak. And he's typically seen in one of three poses. He's either just standing there, kind of being Zeus. Yeah. He is striding forward with a thunderbolt in his raised right hand. So just right there, ready to shake things up. Or simply seated in majesty, just reigning over his creation. Now, Zeus's early days are going to be very familiar to listeners of this program. We won't go into extreme detail. It's come up a few times, but we'll all recall he's, of course, hidden away by his mother Rhea from his father Kronos, who had swallowed all of Zeus's 5 older siblings, so they could not overthrow him. And now we know that with the help of the Oceanid nymph Metis, Zeus causes Kronos to then disgorge all of his brothers and sisters. He frees the imprisoned Cyclopes, who give him his thunderbolt as a thank you gift. He ultimately leads one war against the Titans and another right afterward against the Giants. So has a very triumphant beginning, wins both those big wars, sets up shop in Olympus, and just rules the roost from there. Now, we know he is known, Zeus is, for his erotic escapades. We've talked about that in a great deal. We'll certainly touch on some of them here.
Right.
I want to point out, though, in his defense, Zeus is not all about the infidelities. In fact, Hesiod tells us he was married or is married an impressive 7 different times throughout his early life. And with a little more research, that's a feat that really did set the bar for a lot of powerful people throughout the centuries, even into our own living memory. I mean, you got Jerry Lee Lewis. He was married 7 wives, 6 of which were not his 13-year-old cousin. It's important to point that out. Yeah. The great Richard Pryor had 7 wives, and both Elizabeth Taylor and Larry King were both married 8 times, but to 7 different people. Okay. Neither of which was the other. So just so we're keeping track. So a lot of great tradition of the 7 spouses. Zeus does with Metis, who I just mentioned. She was the one who helped him in his scheme to make Cronus vomit up those elder siblings. So he shows his appreciation to this young nymph by making her his first wife. Great start. Very exciting. A happy couple is just about ready to start their own family. And as you'll recall from episode 6, much like his own father, Zeus gets a disturbing prophecy that his new bride will bear extremely powerful children. First, a daughter who's wiser than her mother, and then the second, a son who's more powerful than his father. Now, the men in this family, that prophecy is going to be a bit of a red flag, and Zeus is no exception. So you may recall that shortly after Zeus impregnates his wife Metis, he has cold feet, turns her into a fly, then swallows her whole, and of course has a subsequent headache, leads to Athena being born by springing fully formed out of his forehead, ready for battle. This is the point where I think Zeus really begins a pivot from this sort of conqueror hero type to just kind of a purveyor of shenanigans, doing things like changing into a fly. This particular one is a good first shenanigan. Of course, it gives us the goddess of wisdom. It helps Zeus avoid the birth of that son who might overthrow him by swallowing that first wife. But the whole tale just kind of suggests, as a husband, some auspicious beginnings for Zeus, I'd say. But, you know, he doesn't give up. He tries again, goes for round 2, branches out and marries his aunt. So a little closer to home, Themis, who gives birth to the Horae, the seasons, and the Moirae, the fates, which you covered in episode 5. Yep. So seasons are out, the fates are out. Next time he goes back to the oceanic nymphs and marries Eurynome, who gives him the 3 charities or the 3 graces. So now again, peopling the world with very important entities, very important divine beings. For his next marriage, he's really moving quickly, and he takes it closer to home, marries his sister. So it goes straight to Demeter, of course, would be goddess of the harvest, who gives him a daughter in Persephone, which is, again, a lovely story for this new young budding family, until a little later where he ends up allowing his brother Hades to kidnap her down to the underworld for a while. So already showing some not just questionable husband skills, but also just really
questionable
judgment in terms of being a father. But he tries again. He goes to wife number 5. It goes back to another of his aunts. So Nemesis, who gives birth to the 9 muses. Of course, we recall from, I think, the previous episode 11, he disguises himself as a shepherd, has relations with her 9 consecutive nights, 1 for each muse, and gives birth to the muses. So by most accounts, the 6th slot is going to go to Leto, who, of course, bears the mighty twins, Apollo, who's his favorite son, and Artemis. So throughout this, Zeus is really working hard. He's setting the table. He's populating the divine world, getting his extended family out there, the seasons, the fates, the charities, a few Olympians in the mix. At the same time, he has not found the kind of eternal love that I think he's longing for. So the marriages come and go. He's not finding lasting love. For a lot of great men, it takes a few tries. You know, could be Zeus, could be Jerry Lee Lewis. Sometimes it's a process. So it's as many as 7 times. But for wife number 7, once he's finally matured and found himself, he does save the best for last. He marries his 7th and final wife, the divine being who would become the queen of the gods, the one and only Hera herself. And with that introduction of Zeus, I will hand it back to you, Andrew, to tell us a little bit about Hera and where she comes from.
Excellent. Thank you. That's some interesting stories there just to start us off. But so Hera is, of course, the queen of the gods. But in addition to that, she is both the goddess of the heavens and she is the goddess of marriage, as well as childbirth. She is, however, not the goddess of motherhood and not the goddess of love, as we'll see. So in terms of etymology, There's not a real clear meaning or origin to Hera, but the most interesting theory that I found is basically just a title that means mistress or lady. So it's just more of an honorific. And on the Roman side, her name, of course, was Juno, which also doesn't have a really clear origin, but it's likely related to rejuvenation or fertility. So both those things come at us. And then, as we noted before, Hera and Zeus, of course, were brother and sister before they were man and wife.
Right.
And as we've said many times, Hera was swallowed by her father Cronus as an infant. And at some point she was freed, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, but it's unclear what state of childhood development or emotional development she was at that point. But we are told that the Titan god Oceanus, who was just basically the ocean,
right,
and his wife Tethys acted as her foster parents, and she often referred to them as her parents in the mythology. So one last thing in this segment that I did want to note, that Hera, or Juno of religious practice, is a little bit different from the myths and literary versions of the goddess that we get. So in literature, anger and wrath are basically not only her go-to moves, but that's pretty much her range of emotions.
Yeah, it's a go-to. Yep.
Very limited exceptions. But in the religious aspect, it's a little bit more varied. So one thing we're going to talk about as we go along is what degree is Hera just getting, a bad edit in these stories. I mean, a very, very, very bad edit. And there's not a lot of material to work with, but it is, there's some other aspects to it, at least when we look at the religious practice. So, try and keep an open mind, even though we've heard a lot about it so far. So, and we talked about you led us right up to their marriage, and I'm going to go a little bit back into kind of their wooing and up to that marriage. So
courtship, yes.
The courtship, yeah. So pretty much all really great love stories have something of a meet cute. We're kind of a maybe silly or embarrassing situation that brings them together and makes for a funny story. And Zeus and Hera, of course, are no exception. They first meet just as Hera was regurgitated by their father. And,
what a time to get together. That's just unexpected.
Comes out, stream of vomit, along with their other siblings, after Zeus had slipped their father that vomit potion.
Right.
So, but presumably, after a little bit of cleanup of the Titan bile, Hera was said to be the most beautiful of goddesses and rivaled even Aphrodite.
Wow.
So naturally enough, she catches Zeus's eye.
Sure.
Now, their mother, Rhea, was not particularly keen on her two children dating, which, to be fair, didn't end up so great for Rhea when she married her brother Cronus.
She speaks from experience.
Yeah, she did. So due to this opposition from her mother, Hera initially rejected Zeus, and this is in the time where he's trying out those other marriages. But Zeus was undeterred. He is nothing if not persistent.
Yes.
So we're told that he desired Hera for 300 years.
Wow.
So major crushing, and driven on by this attraction, and in some accounts by the Moirae sisters or the Fates. Zeus enlists one of his deceptions that we're going to hear much more about, and he also enlists the help of Aphrodite, who helps him in exchange for some benefits for her favorite town of Beirut, apparently. So at the time. Yeah. So Zeus brings about a big storm, which is to drive Hera into a cave for protection. Now, according to one version, just sort of by happenstance, there happens to be a mortal dude who's already in the cave.
Just hanging out there.
He's hanging out there. Yep. He was also driven in from the storm, and his name is Achilles. Now, he's not the Achilles, of course, of the Trojan War, but just a guy who happens to have the same name.
Sure.
Same name. Maybe it was a popular name back then. So this mortal guy decides to act as Zeus's wingman. He's heard rumors that Zeus is interested in Hera, and he makes the case for Hera why she should hook up with Zeus.
All right.
And apparently Achilles is very, very persuasive, because after 300 years, Hera is convinced by this guy in the cave. So now Zeus apparently doesn't know about this, so he still goes through with his plan, and he transforms himself into a cuckoo bird.
Yes.
And knowing that Hera is very fond of animals, seeing the distressed bird, she takes him in and shelters him, which is, well enough of an opening for old Zeus. And he gets in there, though, unbeknownst to him, she may have already been convinced by Achilles. So
the groundwork was laid, but the cuckoo bird was the perfect sort of vehicle for the introduction.
Yeah, so that was kind of a second meet cute for them.
Yeah.
So not sure what Achilles did, during the divine lovemaking. One assumes that he left the cave out into the storm,
right?
Because we know that seeing Zeus's true form or seeing a naked goddess both can be extremely, extremely fatal.
Yes, it's very, very, very deadly. You don't want to look upon that in its pure form.
Yes, but after the event, apparently Achilles comes back and he asks Zeus. He says, how about a little something for the effort? and Zeus says, "Oh, there'll be no money, but long after you were dead, I will make another guy with the same name as you really famous." So not even a constellation, like the least you could do.
Oh,
but he had that going for him, which was nice. So
thanks a lot.
Yeah. So back to Hera and Zeus. After this getting together, Hera demands that they get married, and Zeus complies. So, and the marriage, of course, is a lavish affair. All the gods and all the creatures of Earth are invited. And by one account, the reception itself lasts for 3,000 years.
3,000 years. Now that's a serious bar tab.
Yeah, that is. So, while maybe that was a bit of poetic hyperbole, but it's probably a good thing, as you said, that Cronus had died already, because the bill would have done it anyway. So, and one more thing, one wedding gift that is notable for us, Gaia, who was I believe, Hera's grandmother and is the Earth,
primordial,
gave her a whole tree of golden apples as a wedding gift. And this tree was on an island in the far west, guarded by a combo of a serpent dragon thing and a couple of nymphs known as the Hesperides. And it was the glowing of these golden apples that was said to be the source of the golden light of sunset to every evening celebrate the wedding of Hera and Zeus.
Wow.
So
that's the gift that keeps on giving right there.
Yeah. So we're going to probably hear that maybe some evenings that golden light probably felt a little bit bittersweet to old Hera, yes. But that is how they got together. So
yes.
All right. I think we're going to take our first break now.
Yeah, to close that thought on the wedding, I was going to ask what the proper gift is for a seventh wedding. I guess you've answered that with the sunset. I think your wedding present, you're gonna at least for the groom, you're going to sort of diminish your gift giving as you get deeper into those. But very generous of the grandmother to go with that. I also could not but wonder, does Zeus invite his ex-wives to this wedding? Just out of a gesture, because you think at least a couple of aunts are probably going to be there anyway,
right.
Who are also his wives.
And sister.
Another common sister is also going to be there. So the one he turned into a fly, probably not going to make it. But that guest list is going to get really complicated. So no wonder it took 3,000 years to hash it all out. A lot of potential for discord there. So glad it all worked out okay. So yes, let us take our pause there. And we're going to hear from another podcast here from our friends at Myth Monsters. So Myth Monsters is a bite-sized look at the monsters of global folklore and mythology, all the way from the United Kingdom. It is hosted by Erin, who is a self-confessed mythology addict, and she covers a range of monsters from Gorgons to Kelpies, Wendigos to Bigfoot, even one of my favorites, the Jackalope. So she gives these nice little 15 to 20-minute episodes, new one every Thursday, way more disciplined Andrew than I.
Much more, yes.
And frankly, at the 15 to 20-minute range, much more respectful for the listener's valuable time. So let's hear from Aaron about Myth Monsters, and we'll get you back on the other side of this. Take it away, Aaron.
Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. I'm Erin, a self-confessed mythology addict and occasionally scholar. Myth Monsters focuses on the monsters of global folklore and mythology, with sometimes a cryptid thrown in once or twice. We go from looking at jackalopes to gorgons to wendigos to Bigfoot, from dwarves to elves, and honestly, everything in between. Why should I listen to this podcast over any other mythology podcast out there? Well, we're only 15 to 20 minutes long, so we're perfect in time for your little commute. And also, we focus on a different culture and monster every single week. A real in-depth look into modern media, where they're found in films, TV, video games, and books, and also the origin, description, and if I believe they existed. So it's perfect for any short trips, or if you're into any specific monsters that you fancy. So come join the fun every Thursday, and stay spooky, babes.
All right, we're back. And as we mentioned up front, we're going to talk about the infidelities of Zeus and sort of the wrath of Hera in response to that. Of course, Zeus very well known for those erotic escapades, but as we've heard, being on the lustier side, not uncommon among the ancient gods. He just sort of took the art and took it to a different level, perfected it, if you like. And I would say when it comes to those infidelities, again, he was married 7 wives, so several wives before Hera came along. But really sets the ultimate standard in terms of both just the sheer volume of erotic escapades, but also I would argue, perhaps even to his credit, the pure creativity of how he gets it done. Right. The guy, rarely plays the same card twice, really keeps coming to the table with new ideas to satisfy his lusty appetites. So you'll recall, you alluded to it, Andrew, way back in episode 1, to see a god, particularly Zeus, in his pure form, just too much to handle. You don't want to see the full godhood with holding the lightning bolts, go full Zeus as we've described it. Right. It's too much for a mortal to handle. And of course, the mortal princess Semele did try that, asked for the full Zeus in the middle of their courtship. He warned her not to touch those lightning bolts. And as soon as she did, of course, she was turned to ash and burned immediately. And this is where Zeus's creativity comes to play. He has to take on different forms to not present himself as the full Zeus, to woo the targets of his desires, to don any number of these lusty disguises, which really become his kind of signature. So we've covered some of those instances in the past on the program. You just mentioned his delightful and adorable appearance as a cuckoo bird to rein in Hera. An odd choice, but clearly ultimately very effective. We also talked in episode 8 about how Zeus took on the form of Amphitryon, the war hero. On the very night that general was about to come home victorious from war, Zeus shows up an hour early, disguised as him, beds his fiancée Alcmene, impregnates her with what would turn out to be Heracles, and then just disappears into the night. So it's pretty shameless in his choice of a target of what to emulate. But I would say these kind of scratch the surface when it comes to his willingness to transform in the interest of getting busy. So Zeus becomes an eagle in order to abduct the nymph Aegina. He flies her to an island, grasps her with his talons, takes her away to an island to have his way with her. Aegina's father finds out and pursues them, but Zeus throws down his thunderbolts anyway to chase the father away. So it's quite a striking tableau. He's flying in the air as an eagle. He's carrying his abductee with one talon. He's issuing thunderbolts with the other one. It's a pretty impressive, just sort of multitasking move there. And I'm sure that even Aegina was won over by that level of skill. Like, sure, Zeus, you abducted me, but you really went the extra mile. You're showing me a lot of skill here. Right. Later on, he decides to try turning into a satyr in order to have his way with the beautiful Antiope. Now, a satyr was a little confusing to me at first. I thought, what would she find attractive about a half man, half goat? But I read a little deeper and realized that Zeus wasn't always really great about the whole consent thing. He was just sort of using the satyr to overpower her. So loses some points there. But as far as we know, the first instance of being a satyr was his creation to achieve that goal. He gets even more creative. In order to abduct Aesopsis, he becomes a flame. So somehow fire was a great seduction technique. In an instance of his versatility, in the seduction of Callisto, she was a follower of Artemis, of course, the goddess of the hunt. And by some sources, Zeus transformed into Artemis herself in order to seduce the lovely Callisto. And I
Okay.
don't know if that may have come up in a previous episode. I couldn't recall. It is a fascinating picture. So Callisto thinks she is sleeping with the goddess that she worships, who is in fact Zeus, and somehow in that coupling still ends up getting pregnant.
Right.
So, Zeus, exceedingly fecund, even in female form, and can't help but impregnate Callisto. Now, in an example of Hera's rage, we've heard many, but this is a good instance of her wrath. She discovers this, gets furious, and transforms Callisto into a bear. Now, Zeus feels bad about this at first. As a consolation prize, Zeus then sets her into the stars, and she becomes the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear. So, starting a pattern where Hera doesn't like what she sees in Zeus's behavior and takes it out on the mistress rather than Zeus himself. And the bear was just one example of that. We also have the case of the princess Danae, and this was a new one to me. So her father is King Acrisius, and he learns from the Oracle at Delphi that, surprise, surprise, he would someday be killed by his daughter's son. So he does everything he can to make sure that his daughter, Danae, the princess, does not have any means of reproducing. So the king locks her away. He builds a custom chamber underneath his palace. No windows, no doors, just a skylight to let in light and air. Now, Danae is very beautiful. Zeus has his eye on her. He's heard great things. And he transforms himself into a form of golden rain, which then streams through the roof as a leak into her chamber, and then with very impressive and precise aim, right into her womb. So Zeus in rain form really hits the jackpot there. That ends up soon after leading to the hero Perseus, who is born, and eventually, of course, does fulfill the prophecy, although not in the manner that you would expect. King Acrisius dies while he's a spectator at an athletic competition. Perseus accidentally hits him in the head with his javelin.
Wow.
So after all that effort, it's a freak javelin incident that does him in. That's with
But the fates nailed it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The end result was what they said, but you never can tell.
Right.
I think we've alluded to this before. Zeus later then seduces Europa by taking the form of a very attractive bull, and not just overpowering her, but being such an attractive bull that Europa is taken by him. She sort of strokes his neck, jumps on his back, and once she's there, Zeus takes over, swims over to Crete with her on his back. And after he takes care of business, he then, to his credit, makes her the first queen of the island of Crete. So he shows his appreciation after that bull rendezvous. Another disguise that I can't make much of, in order to woo Medusa, he transforms himself into an ant. No further information as to why that
anything
was
up from
how it worked. So I don't have a biology lesson on that for you, but it is part of his bag of tricks, apparently. Being successful as the eagle once, Zeus brings it back. He becomes an eagle again to pursue Ganymede, who is a young man considered the most beautiful of mortal men. So Zeus, showing he's got, again, some range, erotically takes the occasional male lover. Not only that, but he ultimately made him his cupbearer. So, you loved me as an eagle. Now you get to pour my wine. So, a nice little ongoing relationship there. Zeus then also later on becomes a lapwing, which is a kind of bird, to woo Lamia. But again, Hera gets involved, and in her wrath, decides to make her insane in retribution for that affair. Now, Lamia had a couple of children with Zeus. So in this maddened state, she devours her own children, eats them in that madness, becomes a demon. In a consolation prize. And again, Zeus has this way of sort of saying, yeah, that's bad, but I'll help you out in the back end. So in that consolation prize, Zeus gives her the ability to take out her eyes and then reinsert them. Again, not people try to grasp it, what the logic may have been there. Yeah. Some suspect that they think it was because when Hera drove her mad, she also gave her insomnia, which is classic Hera, like as though being driven insane to devour your own children isn't bad enough, and you're not going to be able to sleep. So Zeus, as that sort of parting gift, says, well, at least you can take your eyes out and maybe get a little shut-eye that way. Very strange. But again, classic Hera in every way. In final instance, Zeus also becomes a swan to seduce Leda. And what makes this notable is after that union, Leda becomes pregnant, but because she was impregnated by Zeus as a swan, she lays eggs. So there are two eggs. One ends up containing Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra, and the other egg contains the great heroes Castor and Pollux. So again, the biology here is not clear. The swan fathering the children, but the woman laying the eggs, it was a different ballgame back then.
Right.
Now, you look at all these disguises and you take all these sort of creative pursuits that Zeus brings to the table. You learn a couple things about his erotic life. I think, first of all, he always does find a way to succeed, even if it resorts to shady means. He gets what he comes for. But second, whatever form he takes, he does seem to almost always impregnate his lover / abductee.
Right.
And again, this is where the wrath of Hera really comes in. Now, we've talked at length about how Hera will stop at nothing to exact revenge against Zeus through the mistresses, through even the children of these illicit unions. We've covered these before in the past. She, of course, prevents Leto from giving birth to the twins Apollo and Artemis on solid ground, so they have to do it in some kind of tree. She rubs that potion on Aphrodite's midsection while she's pregnant, so her baby Priapus would be born with history's first 4-hour erection, I suppose. She gives Heracles a lifetime of misery, first trying to stop him from even coming out of the birth canal, and then sending the snakes to his crib and beyond that.
Yep.
And as we even heard in the previous episode, in episode 11, deprives Echo from the power of speech simply because she kind of talked too much. So clearly willing to take on the those around Zeus's affair as an extension of him. There are a couple of minor examples of Hera's wrath apart from Zeus's philandering, that she was wrathful, I guess, on her own. You hear the story when Garana, who was the queen of the Pygmies, says she's more beautiful than Hera. Well, of course,
Okay.
in this world that never works. That's
Oh,
hubris
hubris.
that cannot be abided. Yes. So Hera not only turns Garana into a crane, that sort of big lanky bird, but also declares that all of Garana's bird descendants through the years will then wage eternal war against the Pygmies. So really playing the long game here. Not only am I going to change you to a bird, but those birds will be the enemies of your people throughout time. Like the Pygmies didn't have it rough enough to begin with. Now they got to deal with the cranes.
Right.
So sometimes Hera would dish out the wrath kind of on her own. And other times she would keep it simple. We mentioned the wedding of Zeus and Hera before. When the nymph Shalone refused to attend that wedding, Hera responded by turning her into a tortoise. That's it. One and done. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Didn't make that mistake twice. So suffice it to say, the majority of Hera's rage is devoted to trying to curb in ways she could the lust of her husband Zeus. And despite her best efforts, he does continue to multiply again and again. Of course, has this family tree that is quite the tangled forest. So with that, speaking of offspring, Andrew, why don't you take us then through the children of Hera, both with and without the king of the gods, Zeus?
Yeah. So, Hera naturally is not as fecund as her husband, nor as roaming, but no one is. But Zeus was home enough nights for them to have at least a couple of children actually together. So how many is actually a little bit controversial. For both Hera's sons, Ares and Hephaestus, which we covered in episodes 1 and 3, there are stories for each of them. They were born to Hera alone, and they were not, in fact, Zeus's sons.
That's right.
Now, we don't know the truth of either of them. This is one of those cold cases controversies. But in both cases, it was said to respond to Athena's parthenogenesis, and she wanted to respond with a little parthenogenesis of her own.
Yes.
So, I particularly was fond of the Ares version, which was in Ovid's Fasti, which you may recall, the flower goddess Flora gives Hera a magic flower to induce pregnancy after she first tests it on a cow, sees that it works, and then uses it on Hera, and that's how we get Ares. But I should say that the most common formula, the most common story was that Hephaestus was the one born via parthenogenesis, and Ares probably was Zeus's son.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get to Hephaestus and Hera had kind of a tempestuous relationship, which you may recall. She cast him out of Olympus, because when he was born, he didn't really look the part of a god, didn't look how she thought he should. So she casts him out and throws him down, and he's raised in a cave. But then he comes back, traps her, in the throne in order to return to Olympus. But sorry, I don't think we did cover then is that Hephaestus also later tries to rescue Hera when she has been imprisoned by Zeus for her first attempt to kill Heracles. So he kind of comes back a little bit on mom's side there. And of course, in that story, then it is Zeus who throws him off of Olympus.
That's right.
For a second time. So I did want to also mention for their 2 daughters, because they had the 4 children who haven't come up as prominently in our season so far. And the first one was Hebe, who is the goddess of youth, and then Alethea, who was the goddess of childbirth. Now, Hebe is kind of interesting. She served as an assistant to Hera, kind of her squire, and she was, for a time, the cupbearer of the gods until she was displaced by Ganymede.
There you go.
So, and then later, she is said to marry Heracles after his apotheosis, who was, of course, her half brother. Right. So taking after her parents and grandparents.
The family tradition, if you will.
And great-grandparents. So for that one. All right. And so I think, we've covered a lot of their myths together. I think you've got a couple myths for Zeus that are not involving Hera or his infidelities.
That's right. That we've heard many of the greatest hits, throughout the season. A lot of the first 11 episodes, most factor in with creative means of seduction, as we just discussed. We also heard him, killing his grandson Asclepius with a thunderbolt back in episode 10 because Asclepius was teaching mortals resurrection, which of course is very bad for the god business. Got in the middle of that right away. We talked about how he observed the poor chariot work of Phaethon, the son of Helios, the sun god, back in episode 6. Of course, Phaethon took out the old man's chariot, essentially driving the sun itself, and was unable to control it. He would either go too high, which could freeze the earth, or too low, which could burn everything. So Zeus, as we'll recall, responded to history's worst student driver by killing him with a thunderbolt. But in his logic, then saving the world. Of course, we heard about him punishing Prometheus for stealing fire, creating Pandora and her infamous box back in episode 5. And who could forget the collaboration with his big brother Poseidon in episode 9, where Zeus got fed up with mankind for all the human sacrifice and other decadence and decided to flood nearly the whole world in rage. So you take all those stories together, without Hera, it gives us a wide range of lessons. So first, if you're a beautiful woman, beware of seductive animals of any kind. Right. If you're the parent of a student driver, don't let him take the nice chariot out for a spin. That could not end well. Above else, just don't try to outwit Zeus. For better or worse, he does always find a way to win, unless Hera finds a way to disrupt that. And, so honestly, at this point, I think we've covered all of his greatest hits, all the big Zeus myths, but for one, which we're actually going to save for the end of this segment. So before we get to the tale of Ixion, why don't you regale us with a couple of other tales of Hera on her own? I think you've got a few that we haven't talked about. I do.
So, not every story about Hera is directly related to her relations with Zeus. But I did find a couple that weren't. So, as we'll find later, one of the biggest centers of Hera's worship was Argos, which is a Greek mainland city between Athens and Sparta. And somewhat similar to the story with Athena and Athens, there was a contest between Hera and Poseidon for the loyalty of Argos. We don't get a lot of details on that, but Hera was awarded the city of Argos by the local river gods. They don't have democracy in Argos, so they let the river gods decide. And Poseidon, in his typical way, retaliated by drying up the rivers of Argos.
Sure.
But then in compromise, during the rainy season, they will fill up again, but become ditches in the dry season because of the wrath of Poseidon.
Right.
But that connection to Argos did put Hera in the unusual position for her in mythology of being a helper deity when it came to Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh, yes.
So Hera is very much an aide to Jason, very much is on his side, rooting for him to get that golden fleece with the Argonauts. And so Hera and Athena team up at one point to save the Argonauts' boat from a group of clashing rocks that are in the middle of the Black Sea, apparently, or were at that time. So from Valerius Flaccus's Argonautica, he tells us, the rocks meet together. Now and again, back and forth, their battered cliffs, headlong flight over the sea. Twice clashed together, cliff with cliff, and rock with rock. Twice shone the flame in the upward flung spray. So big dramatic, they're just rocks in the middle of the ocean clashing together.
Right.
And the Argonauts aren't paying a lot of attention, just going to blunder into the middle of this. And so then Hera and Athena have to spring into action. And it said, and again from the Argonautica, it says, hereupon Hera and Pallas Athena leap sheer down from the sky upon the rocks. This one, the daughter of Zeus, that one, his spouse, constrains the rocks, even as one who with brawny strength thrusts down beneath the yoke toward their bellies the unwilling horns of a bull. So that last sentence, maybe that last metaphor maybe doesn't translate as well in the 21st century, but back in the 2nd century, that was a killer.
Yes.
Apparently, I looked this up, and apparently it has something to do with holding down the head of a bull in order to yoke them to a plow, which I imagine is probably something I couldn't do. So
no, definitely not. No, I'm probably a more in-demand skill back then, but forget it. I would not be useful at all in that.
No, definitely have to hire that one out. So, then later on the return trip, Hera outsources her Jason saving tasks to Medea, who is a princess sorceress. And in this case, Hera goes to Aphrodite and says, can you help me get Medea to fall in love with Jason so that we can use her sorcery to keep saving this guy?
Right.
And so that's what happens. And so for the rest of the trip, it's basically just Medea saving Jason the Argonauts again and again. So I kind of admire, her ability to delegate on that and the efficiency of that move.
Absolutely.
That she didn't want to keep coming to his aid. But then in another epic, the Aeneid, Hera returns to her more traditional role of antagonist and violent, but largely indirect tormentor. So in this case, the title character of the Aeneid, Aeneas, is the object of her wrath, in part because he was a Trojan and she's still mad about that golden apple that she didn't get. So it's maybe something for us to consider.
Yep.
Give us a little pause. But also Hera was a patron of the city of Carthage, apparently, and she foresaw bad things for Carthage if Aeneas was able to found the city of Rome, which is what he was prophesied to do.
Right.
So she tries to set out to stop that. And her first move is she sends violent winds against Aeneas and his fleet in order to force them away from Italy so they can't land there and force them to Carthage. And then she teams up with Aphrodite, who is the mother of Aeneas, and to ship Aeneas and the queen of Carthage, Dido, and get them in a relationship, thereby hoping to keep him in Carthage and stop the founding of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
But Zeus does come into this one at this point. He's not having it because, according to Virgil, he really wants that great Augustus guy to eventually become emperor.
No agenda at all in telling that story that way.
No. And he's also, I assume, looking forward to that Gladiator movie with Russell Crowe that's going to be coming out in about 3,000 years.
Yes.
So, he compels Aeneas to leave Dido, who the queen of Carthage, and go to Italy. And ironically, it is this breakup that starts the enmity between Carthage and Rome, because Dido curses Aeneas and all of his followers forever.
Yeah.
So again, fate has a way of fulfilling itself.
It sure does.
All right. So so that's what I have on them sort of, separately.
Yeah.
You had something on Ixion.
Yeah, and this was new to me. I'd never heard this one before. It's a weird one, but kind of fascinating in its way, and it has sort of an unusual ending that I did not see coming. So Ixion is the king of the Lapiths, which is the most ancient tribe of Thessaly in Greece, and he marries Dia, who is she's a princess, daughter of King Dionysus. And as part of the marriage, Ixion promises his father-in-law a valuable present, So this is what they used to call the bride price. So kind of like a reverse version of the dowry that would happen in some situations. So he promises this gift to the king, but Ixion eventually just reneges, does not pay the bride price, just says he's going to, and he doesn't. So the king, King Dionysus, understandably upset by this, not going to take it sitting down. So he seeks a little bit of revenge on his new son-in-law by stealing some of Ixion's horses. Okay. So the son-in-law, father-in-law relationship already not going great for the young couple, but still fairly modest. I won't give that gift. Maybe you take a couple of my horses. Ixion takes it in stride. He's not going to get too upset about the horses. He hides his resentment, and he decides to invite his father-in-law to a feast at Larissa, which of course is the capital of Thessaly, his home region. So the king, they're gonna bygones be bygones. The king arrives at the feast. His son-in-law Ixion greets him and pushes him into a bed of burning coals, killing him instantly. Now, this escalated very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly, yeah.
You got the bride price, you got the horses, suddenly a fiery death. Now, what's important to note is this is a huge violation of something called xenia, which is the Greek concept of, in our kind of translation, guest-host relations.
Right.
You just don't invite a man to a feast and throw him into a fire. It's just not done.
It's bad form.
Terrible manners. Terrible xenia. Now, Ixion, after committing this crime, then just goes mad, and even his fellow princes refuse to perform what they normally would do, these sort of cathartic rituals that would cleanse him of his guilt since he's royalty. They refuse to do that. He's insane. So he ends up just being shunned by society. He kind of lives as an outlaw. He's almost like an ancient Arab version of OJ, if you like, but without the legendary accomplishments in football and acting. So, no Heismans, no Nordberg, just terrible manners around an extended family member. So despite being this social outcast and this pariah, there's one guy who takes pity on old Ixion, the guy who also has a complicated view of right and wrong, who may have burned a bridge or two in his own day, who sees another man using fiery death to settle a score and thinks, yeah, maybe this guy, maybe he deserves a second chance. And of course, that guy is Zeus himself.
Right.
So Zeus not only takes pity on Ixion, he actually kind of welcomes him into his home. He invites him to Olympus. He introduces him at the table of the gods, despite him being such a pariah. How does Ixion respond to this kind gesture from Zeus? Well, immediately, his first step is to lust after Hera, Zeus's wife. After being invited to his home, being introduced to the gods, another gross violation of guest-host relations. So Zeus, here's where he has to get crafty. So Zeus decides to
imagine.
He creates a cloud in the shape of Hera, and then he tricks Ixion into coupling with this Hera-shaped cloud. Now, it's a bit of magic how he does this.
Right.
They get together, Ixion and the cloud, and somehow this union of Ixion and fake Hera cloud creates a child. It's named Centaurus, who ends up engendering the entire race of centaurs, the half-man, half-horse creatures. So even though Ixion, his lust was expressed on a cloud who was shaped like Zeus's wife, that Zeus himself created for this purpose, Zeus still feels the need to punish him even further. So naturally, after this, he kicks him out of Olympus, hits him with a thunderbolt on his way out, of course, and then he orders a special punishment. He asks Hermes, or directs Hermes, to bind Ixion to a wheel with wings and fire. So this burning solar wheel, they called it, that spins for all eternity as a punishment, first across all the heavens, and then it lands in the underworld and spins down there. So perhaps, we've talked about Zeus's creativity, perhaps the ultimate act of creativity, he was able to devise a wheel even less entertaining than the Wheel of Fortune, and somehow was in operation for even longer. So we don't really have a story of how Hera reacted to this whole affair. It's a rare treat for her in a way, because for once she's the object of lust. Zeus is the one who's kind of left high and dry. I got to believe that she kind of admired Zeus for that moment. She kind of admired just the inventiveness of it all. And in my mind, every time that she would catch a cloud that looked a little bit like her in the sky, that she would smile and think, in his own strange, creepy way, that slimy old bastard really stood up for his beloved seventh final wife through the ancient art of cloud-based deception. Now that's love. So I think you've got one final tale to cap off the journey of Zeus and Hera before we take a breather and get to our categories. Do you not?
I do. And this is kind of in reconciliation round. So at some point, and we don't really know when this came up, Hera had just had it with Zeus. Understandably, all the infidelities and got tired of the elaborate revenge plots. They just felt a little bit stale. So she left him. Despite being the goddess of marriage, she leaves him. And immediately, Zeus is distraught, and he tries to get her back. Now, we're not given a lot of details about how he initially attempts this, but my guess is the first 8 or 9 attempts probably involve turning himself into some sort of livestock. But she's a little beyond that at this point.
I know these tricks.
Yeah. So once that fails, he goes to the local mountain god Kithairon for advice, which is local to where Hera has separated herself to. And so Kithairon tells Zeus, issue a sincere apology, pledge to change ways, maybe go for a little couple counseling. No, actually, that's not what he says at all. What he says is, no, not at all. No, this is mythology. So what he does tell him to do is marry someone else. And how about the Princess Platea? And so we get this via Pausanias. And he says, Hera heard the news at once, and at once appeared on the scene. But when she came near the wagon and tore away the dress from the image, she was pleased at a deceit, finding it was a wooden image and not a bride at all, and was reconciled to Zeus. So what he really has done is he's had a woman carved of wood and staged a fake wedding.
Wow.
In order to make Hera jealous, and it works, and she comes down, and this jealousy has reignited her love for Zeus, and she returns to him. And I assume they both had a good laugh together about the wooden image. And then Pausanias tells us that in his time, when he recorded that Platea fake marriage, where that took place, there was a regular festival to honor the occasion, which culminated in the burning of a wooden bride statue.
Remember that time?
And a sacrifice of a cow to Hera and a bull to Zeus.
Oh, that's heartwarming. The ultimate act of creativity doesn't have to take the form of a flame or an animal. It's just a simple wooden statue, and it pulls on the heartstrings. Well done.
Yeah. So and this verse, of course, gives us a little bit of the implication, that the roaming of Zeus and the jealousy of Hera were, a part of their particular love language.
That's right.
As deeply, deeply dysfunctional as it was. And with that, I believe we're going to take a break, and we're going to move on to our rounds and maybe give out a golden apple here.
That is correct. Let's just take a quick breather and back in just a few for those 5 categories.
All right. And we are back, part of our 5 rounds, to decide who's going to win this golden apple and move on to our final contest. And our first round, as always, is Immortal Combat. We have a physical confrontation between the two gods. So I'll go first. And it's not real comfortable, real happy talking about a physical confrontation between a husband and wife.
No.
It's not, we've had brothers before.
Sure.
I think Mars and Dionysus, Apollo and Vulcan.
Mm-hmm.
We had Uncle Heracles against his nephew Aristeus. Hecate and Artemis are literal same versions of themselves fighting. So that was sort of some sort of split personality thing.
Very meta.
But this for obvious cultural reasons is a little less comfortable.
Yes.
Some connotation. So we'll try to be sensitive about it. And Matt's going to talk about Zeus, and I'll just give kind of what Hera has. So physically, Hera is no joke. She can wrestle autokinetic sea boulders, just like a strong dude yoking a bull or something.
That's not nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. She and you will recall that in the Iliad, she takes on Artemis, and whacks her over the head with her own bow, sending her
Right.
crying to her mother.
That's right.
So, a goddess versus goddess battle. Now, on the downside, she tends to go for overly complicated lines of attack. Floating islands, snake monsters, and such, which I think can kind of be a bit of a weakness. But I will say that there are different sorts of physical confrontations. Now, in the Iliad, there's a famous scene of Hera employing a very different kind of attack. Now, so she's eager to aid the Greeks in the Trojan War against Zeus's command. So what Hera does is she gets herself all dolled up and basically just sort of walks by Zeus. And so this from the Iliad says, now let us taste the joys of love, for never has such desire for a goddess or mortal woman so gripped and overwhelmed my heart. Not even when I was seized by the love for Ixion's wife. So then our smooth-talking king of the gods names 8 different women that he cheated on Hera with and says that none of them were quite as attractive to him as Hera was at that moment. I'm sure, grinding her teeth.
Great compliment. Really a smooth talker there.
Yeah, so grinding her teeth. Hera takes it as a compliment. And Zeus draws a cloud around them. And then they enjoy marital relations. And then as Zeus is in his sort of post-relations relaxation with the prearranged help of the god of sleep, Hypnos, Hera puts Zeus to sleep so that she and the other gods can meddle in the Trojan War without Zeus knowing about it. So
caught him at just the right time.
Yeah, so she does in that moment find one of Zeus's main weaknesses.
Yeah,
so.
I should say. Yes.
So that's what I had for Hera, and what do you have on Zeus?
Well, for all of Hera's range, maybe it's a little bit too much in terms of the complicated nature of her schemes. Zeus, in contrast, pretty single-minded in terms of his weaponry. I mean, that thunderbolt is really his go-to every time. So it is both.
Right.
It doesn't show a ton of range, but it also is very precise and very effective. Interestingly, Zeus is essentially undefeated, really, in terms of holding on to power. I mean, there are little moments where it's like a sudden, quick little palace skirmish, but it's quickly done away with because everyone immediately sticks up for Zeus because he's the boss. So even in little moments where his power is briefly threatened, it's squashed right away. So we hear that we know Zeus was a great warrior in terms of the beginning of his life before he kind of converted to full-time philandering in the defeat of the Titans and of the giants. Interestingly, I don't recall any stories of any actual physical confrontation with Hera. I feel like those, a literal expression of this domestic violence, I don't think we have a story of that. There was a respect there that held back. I also don't recall Zeus. I think when he would use a thunderbolt as a weapon, it was typically against a man. Not to say that he was respectful to women across the board by any stretch. There was a great deal of reduction and a lot of that. But in terms of physical force, the thunderbolt was really all that was required. So I think in a one-on-one battle, it is, as we've discussed before, there is the power and the weaponry, and there's the willingness to use it.
Right.
I think in this case of Zeus, he has the power and the weaponry. He is willing to use it. I don't know if he would be willing to use it on Hera in that precise confrontation.
Right. So there was, in the story, there was one rebellion that is told that Hera fomented actually with Athena against Zeus, and he did punish her by hanging her from the heavens. In that, so he did. In
So
that, but
doesn't have a fully clean record there. Okay.
No, he does not have a fully clean record. And that is part of the story of why Hera always goes after, because she had to pledge to never rebel
I see.
again.
Interesting.
So
that explains a lot.
So that is why she had to kind of go after the other targets. But, I think the question is, so obviously Hera has the trick that's can Zeus stay on task long enough to complete a battle, for the sake of a podcast? With the rebellion, his direct power was threatened, and that was seen as more of an existential threat for the sake of exhibition match put on by an independent podcast. Is he going to be able to focus if she shows a bare shoulder?
That's a great point. Or even just to parade any number of nymphs in his field of vision, I think would be distracting enough. She has a very keen sense of his weak spot, and as you say, a demonstrable ability to exploit it.
Right. So I don't know that I think he's going to have the concentration to pull this off. So I think that Hera's probably going to take this.
I think I will. It's a close call. I think I will go with Zeus on this. I think you make an excellent argument. And I only give Zeus the edge because he also was willing in a moment to destroy the entire world with the flood. So I think in the right moment of rage, I think he can be pushed to even great lengths. I'd like to think that Hera would be the red line that he wouldn't cross in terms of that. But I think just out of sheer power and sheer ability to overtake another in the right frame of mind, I think I will give Zeus the edge. So we got to tie. It comes down.
We are tied on this one. I think it comes down to it does come down to that frame of mind and what headspace he's in.
That's right. But I would say that if anybody has a unique window in which to defeat Zeus, Hera would be the one to accomplish that for these reasons.
Right. All right. So that puts us on to our second round, curriculum deity, which is which god would you rather be? And which god would you rather worship? Who has that it factor?
Yes.
And you're going to go first on this one, I believe.
Yeah. So being Zeus is a complicated matter. Of course, it's always tempting to be the boss, but as they say, heavy hangs the crown. It's a great deal of responsibility. As much as he is ruling over Olympus and seemingly all powerful, much of his mythology is stories of having to fix things because the underlings just can't quite pull it off. So he's always being pulled in every time there's a need for a judgment or any kind of big decision. Even though he really wants to be a good manager and to delegate those kinds of things to his divine cabinet, oftentimes he is still brought in to be the tie-breaking vote, and you sense a sense of almost frustration from that. So, yes, you have the power and the authority, but I think there's also a drag that comes with that potentially. I think this installment makes it very clear, as we've talked about all along. Zeus has some serious demons, even though he's had a good life and a life of privilege. I would say he's probably our first diagnosed case of sex addiction, and maybe even the ultimate case study. Could not find happiness. Clearly, a lot of scattered offspring as a result of his philandering. Leaves a lot of broken homes in his wake. I do have a warm spot that he did have Hera throughout this. So even though he was really unable to find anything lasting outside in the world, he had various levels of relationship with his children, from very close to essentially none at all. But Hera was always there. So there's something to be said about that. At least he did find it eventually. So being him, some good and some not so good. In terms of following Zeus, this clearly was the marquee figure to be worshipped throughout the land in the era. The center of his worship, unsurprisingly, was Olympia, based in the surroundings of Mount Olympus. And of course, being the top tier entity, the big kahuna of athletic contests held every 4 years in Olympia. You may have heard of it. It still does technically exist to this day as the Olympic Games, even though to me it always seems like they're taking place in China now. But the Olympics technically are still happening, just with smog and sleds and things. To give you an idea of Zeus's popularity compared to other deities in terms of being worshipped, the altar to Zeus at Olympia, normally the altars are made of stone at one of these temples. The altar at Olympia was made from the ash of the accumulated remains of centuries worth of animal sacrifices. So there was so much worshiping that the ashes themselves formed the temple, formed the altar, just to give you a sense of being far and above the top of the heap there. Of course, unanimously beloved in Crete, his island of his birthplace, essentially his hometown. And even as a bonus, where most oracles were devoted to Apollo, Zeus actually had a few oracles even in his name. So he had his own smaller but still present oracle franchise in the mix, where nobody else but his son Apollo had that. So
Yeah.
pretty good deal in terms of following Zeus. A lot of followers, a lot of good fellowship, the ultimate in 4-year celebrations, the ultimate in community and sacrifice. So pretty strong case to be made there. Probably a stronger case on follow than to be Zeus.
Right.
How about you?
All right. So on Hera, Hera isn't portrayed as a particularly happy goddess. I think we can say that pretty unquestionably. And certainly not without reason. She had her reasons, but she has a philandering husband,
Right.
with illegitimate children and parthenogenic kid, and not a great situation.
No.
Her relationship with her daughters and her son Ares are somewhat okay.
Mhm.
Again, more complicated with Hephaestus, though he does kind of come around. From that bit in the Iliad that I referenced before, we do get a little bit of description of Hera and her room on Olympus. We can kind of get a sense of what it was like to be her. And this is from the Iliad. It says, "She therefore went to the room fashioned for her by her dear son Hephaestus, and with its strong doors fitted to the doorposts, and its hidden bolt that no other god could open. And then she cleansed every mark on her lovely body with gentle ambrosial oil. If its scent was released in Zeus's palace, it would spread through the heaven and earth. And then she anointed her shapely form and combed her hair with plaited, glistening tresses. And she clothed herself in ambrosial robe that Athena had worked smooth and skillfully embroidered." It goes on to describe she's got some really blingy earrings and a 100-tasseled belt. So she's got kind of the accoutrement of a queen. She's got a nice palace.
Yeah.
She's got fancy clothes, ambrosia all around.
You got the doors hanging right there on the doorposts. I mean,
Yeah,
you got it all.
that's and again she had Hephaestus, best craftsman crafting a room, and she even had Athena, that parthenogenic daughter, had to make her a dress. So she took a little advantage, at least, of being the queen.
That passage reads very much like almost a Harlequin romance novel. It's the soft caressing of the beautiful skin.
Oh yeah. If I'd gone really into the details, that is leading up to that seduction of Zeus. That is the thing right before.
All right, that makes sense.
Seduction. Now. So they're going into it.
That wasn't just like a Tuesday night at home. Okay.
No, that was her getting ready to just kind of basically just walk by Zeus with all her finery on and get things going.
Yeah.
So she also does have her own herald, Iris, because Hermes is the herald of Zeus. Iris, who is the goddess of the rainbow, is the herald of Hera. And for a time she had Argos, her 100-eyed giant, in a retinue until killed by Hermes. But she's so distraught by him being killed that he was transformed into the first peacock, and all his eyes are actually on the tail of the peacock.
Nice.
So, and then she has a chariot, a flying chariot that is pulled by peacocks. So
that's not impressive.
That's not bad.
It's a good ride. Yeah.
But again, she is constantly angry and scheming much of the time. I get the sense a little bit that the scheming is, it's a little bit her craft. She seems to maybe enjoy it because everything she does is maybe a little bit more elaborate than it actually needs to be.
A little showy. Yeah. Some extra style points involved. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe she needs to do it to maintain plausible deniability with Zeus. But I feel like she just kind of enjoys the scheming. So on the worship side, it's not as widespread as Zeus, but she did have a giant temple on the Greek island of Samos, which is thought to be actually the oldest enclosed Greek temple and older than any temple to Zeus. I assume because the oldest Zeus as a sky god used to go full sky out in the open.
Right.
But she had the oldest temple in Greece that at least is known. And there were the Hera Games, which were athletic competitions for female athletes. So the female version of the Olympics, because the Olympics at that time were male only. There was that festival I referenced early called the Dela, which was that remarriage festival of Hera and Zeus. And then we haven't talked too much about the Roman side, but in Rome, Juno was considered part of kind of the triad of top deities that they worshipped, along with Jupiter and Mars. And she had a number of festivals in her honor throughout the year, one of which was called the Matronalia. And that was celebrated in February with a women-only procession through the city to Juno's main temple. And then it ended up with sort of a Mother's Day holiday where the husbands had to give their wives gifts and the daughters had to give them to their mother. And nicely, I suppose, the enslaved women in Rome had the day off for that. So
I guess better than nothing, but still,
it
still
doesn't make up. Yeah, doesn't make up for everything, but it's something.
Yeah.
So, and of course, Hera was also a big deal in the city of Argos, and there was a big festival there that involved pulling of a giant statue of Hera through the town to her main temple, and that was usually done by a couple of oxen. But then we get another story from Pausanias on this one, and it says that Hera absolutely had to be conveyed to her temple by a team of oxen, but their oxen had not come back from the fields in time. So 2 youths put the yoke upon their own shoulders under the constraints of time. They drew the wagon with their mother, the priestess, riding atop of it, traveling 5 miles until they arrived at the temple. So, the whole town is really celebrating these 2 strong young men.
Sure.
The town holds a sacrifice and a dance, and then the mother of the 2 youths, who was a priestess of Hera, goes to Hera, and she prays to Hera, and says, can you do something for my boy? Something, they pulled your statue this whole way, and Hera decides that the most beautiful thing for men that might come to them is their death.
Oh, come on.
And so apparently it was Hera's conviction that for mortals, it was actually better to be dead than alive. So the 2 boys died in their sleep that night.
That is leaving no good deed unpunished.
That's what I have on Hera.
Wow.
Well,
I think all that put together, I think I would have to give Zeus my vote. I think the misery is as nice as her surroundings seem to have been. And while she did get joy in certain parts of her scheming, just the sheer fact of living with somebody who is as philandering as Zeus is, I think could make for a pretty miserable existence. So while Zeus has his demons for sure, I think if I had to pick one, I would still be him.
Well, yeah, some of this comes down. Would you want to live with Zeus or be Zeus? So,
yeah, that's it. And I think I would rather be him.
Yeah. So I think I'm not going to really call it on the being. Because I don't think I would really want to be either of them. But I think on the worship side, that is clearly tipped to Zeus.
Yeah.
And obviously the Zeus of worship is a little bit different than the Zeus of mythology, even though that gets covered in the worship. I assume that what they're worshiping was more the law and order part. Yes. But I'm going to go with that. So yeah, I think the worship for me tips it. So we both for this round are going to go on Zeus. So it is 1 for Zeus and a tie. And this brings us to a round that's going to be a little tough this episode. And that is Good God, which is just simply the character round.
Right. So,
as I said in the opening, Hera may get a little bit of a tough edit in the literature, but there's a fair amount of bad material to deal with. She was dealt a bad hand, and not clearly that she played it that well, but a little bit of the good. So she was a protector of pregnant women and childbirth, and that's when she was often prayed to, is to protect women and their babies during childbirth. So and she was the goddess of marital good luck, which she did not have herself, but
but doled it out.
So to her worshippers. So and obviously there is a lot of bad, because that's the good. Her frustration and anger with Zeus's actions, while they were understandable, and she was at a power disadvantage with Zeus. It was the other women and children that were her target. And I guess this is a case of two wrongs not making a right.
Right.
Then there's the Trojan War, where her being denied an apple spurned her on to 10 years
Yes.
of revenge seeking, when she already had a whole tree
Yeah.
of golden apples.
That never occurred to me, but yeah, that was really
just sitting out
asking
there.
a lot. It was really more of a pride thing, I would think. Yeah.
Yes, it definitely was more of a pride thing. It was not the actual apples, but so I don't want to rehash every torment that she unleashed on a resume. I think it's pretty well known at this point for anybody who follows our podcast, but we'll just leave it at that. Hera's role was nearly always as the antagonist of human heroes and humanity in general in myth. So not a lot going on in the good. So what do you have?
Yeah, I mean, often in this category we use the term mixed bag, and I think it's certainly true here. Zeus is no exception. I think but it's a front-loaded good with a lot of bad after it. So the front-loaded good being obviously establishing Olympus, fighting those wars, setting up a great society, and giving, fathering all of the sort of essential divine elements of the universe as we know it. But then quickly just pivoted and reverted to the art of the erotic shenanigans, punctuated by sudden unpredictable bloodlust. Some combination of those two, certainly terrible to women on the whole. I think there were a few instances where there were some moments of romance, but for the most part, huge power dynamic problems, whether he was taking the form of an animal, fire, rain, whatever. And really did a lot less in the way of good for the majority of his life once he set up shop and became the authority figure.
Right.
So not great. And especially when you consider how it's almost as though the actions of one of this couple really did kind of feed off the negativity of the other.
Yeah.
But they are, as we said at the beginning, they're somewhat inseparable.
Right.
So it's really hard to isolate the character of one from the other because they're almost magnifying the worst possible parts of you.
Yeah, they really do play into each other. And with those stories on the, one of the interesting things, and I don't know, when people have read as much Greek mythology as we have now after 12 episodes, realize, but there's different versions of each of these stories, and there's the worst versions and the not as bad versions, and with Zeus's infidelities, there's ones that can go kind of either way, but none of them are ever really good.
No,
just how bad really kind of is it?
Yeah.
So and I kind of mentioned this earlier. So the problem of good and evil, or the problem of evil. So yes, the problem of evil, and in the religious and philosophical sense. So what this means is a question for religion and philosophy, like, why does so much bad and evil stuff happen? And it's kind of a particular problem for monotheistic religions.
Right.
If God is all good and all powerful, why do bad things keep happening?
Right.
And the people fall back into God has mysterious ways. Maybe he's testing us, by sending this plague or whatever. But it's still something that polytheistic religions have to explain. And to me, it sort of dawned on me that this relationship between Zeus and Hera goes a long way of explaining why bad things kept happening in the Greco-Roman religion. So it's just basically it's a world headed by a dysfunctional couple.
Yes. A
dysfunctional family. And that's kind of maybe how they thought of things. But, as you said, they both share the blame in different ways. But they fed off each other and kind of created much of the bad that actually happened.
Yeah. And if you're going to have like a dysfunctional mother and father, then that family beneath them is bound to be a fruit of that poison.
Yes.
And so essentially, if all of us are the children beneath that dysfunctional parent, like in a way, they're the kind of responsible for the world being as troubled as it is right now.
This is true. Extension. So yes, and of course, our purpose is to save this troubled world. Yes. So, I think where does that leave us? So the other thing is arguably, they had their chance. They led at least the Mediterranean world for 1,000 years.
That's right.
And didn't do a bang up job by most accounts.
So we actually have data of what happens when they are in charge. And
That's
it's not
true.
great. It's a lot of problems. And yes,
slavery, war.
Yeah. And it did not last. Clearly it faded off into obsolescence at around the time of the fall of these various empires. I don't know if we might consider just disqualifying both of them, I think, based on this logic.
Yeah. I mean, neither. I can't see it. I think we have to prevent any chance that they come out of this in the end for the process to maintain its integrity.
Yes.
I think just cutting it off now is the way to go. So folks, we have a first. I think we're agreeing on this.
Yes.
If we're agreeing on it, because I think that there's not going to be a winner in this round, this episode.
I think it is a double disqualification. Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Yes.
So for the first time in God versus God history, we will walk away without a winner.
We will.
For this reason, I think that's good logic. I agree with that assessment.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely agreed on that, because I was like, is there a way we could get it to a tie and just sort of not? But no, I think disqualification is the way to go.
I like it.
So we still have 2 rounds.
We do. We got to respect the process, right?
We do have to respect the process. We've had rounds where by this point the winner was obvious.
We still kept going.
We've always, like, sometimes the movie, when we get to Matinee Idol,
right, we
already know who has come out on top, but we've always gone through with it, and I think we should do that in this case also.
Absolutely.
So for pro forma, for record keeping only, please, no wagering, we're going to go on to iconography, and I believe you have the first on this one.
Yes. So, Zeus has been, at least on the screen, has been portrayed by a really top-notch series of actors. I mean, you got Laurence Olivier in the original Clash of the Titans. You got Liam Neeson on the remake. Rip Torn in the Disney animated Hercules. You got Sean Bean. I didn't know that. Yeah, Sean Bean in Percy Jackson movie. Most recently, of course, the aforementioned Russell Crowe in Thor: Love and Thunder, which just came out this summer. And I don't know if you've seen that yet. It's a polarizing performance. I've talked to some folks who find it very entertaining and almost to the point of absurdity. I found the over the top Greek accent that he affects in this film to make his scenes nearly unwatchable. So, viewer beware. I believe it is on Disney Plus as of today. So you can check that out. But so if nothing else, Zeus has been a common fixture in a lot of these movies, played by great actors. You'll also recall, I believe you'll probably have a memory of the Arnold Schwarzenegger as Zeus brief cameo in a Super Bowl just last year in an ad. Yes. Do you recall what what company that ad was for?
BMW.
Oh, very, very good. See, I had to look that up, and I actually make ads sometimes. So that's I'm glad that you remembered that. Yes. A lot of people were disappointed because there was a leak with him as Zeus. It seemed like it was almost a cinematic approach, but no, just a Super Bowl commercial. So, the name Zeus has a lot of presence in the arts. It is at once a Canadian indie rock band called Zeus. There is an Italian math rock band, which is styled with an exclamation point. So it is actually pronounced Zeus.
Did you say math rock band?
I did. Math rock. Yes. Are you aware of that subgenre? Yeah, it is a thing. Yeah. And there's Zeus is the name of a rapper from Botswana. I was not aware of that particular artist or subgenre, but based on his name, I presume he must be the best at it. It is also the name of both an American wrestler and a Japanese wrestler. And Zeus was the name of the world's tallest dog, a Great Dane from Otsego, Michigan, who on his hind legs was 7 feet 5 inches tall. That is 2.26 meters for those other kind of measurers, but you know who you are. Sadly, the dog Zeus died of old age at the ripe old age of 5 a few years back. And in terms of boys' names, Zeus very low on the totem pole, only 1,147th, which means about 1 out of every 10,693 baby boys born in 2021 carried the name Zeus. Understandably, it's rare. That's a lot to live up to. You're coming in hot with a name like that. Beyond that, we see obviously as Jupiter, we've got the planet, we've got, some of those various accoutrements, but for the most part, pretty strong presence in the silver screen and, the occasional typical selection of missile launchers, submarines, asteroids, and what have you. But a pretty strong presence, as you'd expect from the King of Gods.
All right. So, I'm going to start with the Roman side because that's actually the stronger one for Hera. Because, of course, we have the month of June.
Yes.
Is named for Juno. That's one of a 12 again.
Yep.
So that's a pretty big get. And the name June is, the 200th most popular girl's name in the U.S. And Juno is less popular, but it's actually in the top, I believe, 400 in Great Britain. So it's a little bit of play there.
Okay.
Then there is, of course, the Juno spacecraft, which is a probe of Jupiter. So a little play on that, and is currently doing a flyby of Io and Europa and managing to torment them in some way.
I was going to say, the mistresses, the wife, all in the same dinner party up there. Yeah.
Yeah. So now the Canadian music industry, their premier awards are the Juno Awards. And there is, in a couple smaller things, you have Juno brand lighting. So a lot of light fixtures named after her. That's nice. Then Juno Beach in World War II. That is one of the beaches for D-Day was Juno Beach. And the original code name, interestingly enough, of this was Jellyfish.
Oh. Okay.
But then then there was Swordfish, and they're all named for fish. But then they got shortened, the fish was dropped. And Winston Churchill considered the name Jelly to be too silly for, of course, this important battle.
Yes.
So he's the one who changed it to Juno.
Got to be attentive to those little details. That's right. Tone matters.
Style points. So Juno, Alaska is named for a French explorer, but his name is a gender-neutral French version of Juno. So then on the Greek side, there's a Hera makeup line, which when you Google Hera, that comes up a lot because they make a lot of different products. And of course, there is a line of rifles, German-made rifles, the Hera. There is the Hera calendar app for people who do a lot of virtual meetings. So, something people to look forward to. That in popular culture, occasionally she will appear, in those kind of usual suspect type movies, Clash of the Titans, those sorts of things. But occasionally there'll be some Hera standalone projects, a little more obscure. I found a couple of them I thought were interesting enough to at least mention. And there is a Korean movie called Hera Purple. And this is about a woman who goes to a psychologist and she is hypnotized. And in her hypnotic state, she has flashbacks of Black Widow-like murders that she committed recently while being possessed by the Greek goddess Hera.
Wow.
And then, so apparently the review I read of this, that is a confusing bit of editing. And they also follow a group of detectives who are investigating the murder. But, so that's out there. People are interested.
Yeah.
So then there is a book called Queen Hera. And then it says, this is about Hera. It says, as queen, Hera has no choice. She must lead a team of gods to the mortal world to search for the missing goddesses, even though it means temporarily becoming mortal herself. But mortality begins to change Hera, affecting how she thinks, how she feels. And it gets much worse after she meets Justin, a boy who defies every prejudice she once had about mortals. So that is Hera, Queen of the Gods by T.D. Thomas, and has 4.5 stars on 115 reviews on Amazon. So,
well, in terms of mortals, you don't get much more mortal than Justin.
Yes, there you go. That is what I had. It's probably not as much as Zeus. I think we could probably say that.
Not. I mean, but a pretty good standing, a nice spread. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the month of June.
That ain't nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty good. but I think we got to go with Zeus on this
I
one.
think Zeus does take the cake, if in fact either was still eligible. But for
Scorekeeping purposes,
yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. All right, and this moves us on to the movie round, and this is Matinee Idol. So, and I will go first here, and this is who would make the best movie or limited series. Category that we've seemed to liberalize a little bit.
I mean, it is subject to much creative interpretation. Yes,
as we've gone on. So, I will say, as the center of a movie, it's kind of hard to see Hera as the hero. But I also think, given the circumstances that she has to deal with, it's not quite right to see her as a pure villain either. So she's maybe something of an anti-heroine, and that's kind of the direction that I went with, as a woman who's been done wrong and is lashing out. So I would set Mount Olympus. So it's still Mount Olympus, but I'm going to set it in a kind of JFK style White House, where Zeus is kind of a JFK madman type figure of that time, and Hera is styled as Jackie Kennedy with the pink Chanel suits, the pillbox hat, that kind of thing. We put Zeus's affairs mostly off screen, but we kind of see the other women through Hera's eyes as social climbers, many of them getting vain about their connection to the king of the gods. See a few of her revenge plots. And I was kind of thinking that we'd have this with much of Hera's dialogue is given to her poor daughter Hebe, who kind of has to kind of go along with this, is caught between these two parents.
Right. And
Platia, her once wooden rival, who has been turned into her silent confidant. So, and then we got her anger. It's real, but we also see her plotting, and she's kind of a bit of a Joker type figure. And we could show episodes like Io, who I would have done up kind of as a Marilyn Monroe figure, and instead of her being turned into a cow, she's maybe turned into a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette, which Hera demands from her husband, and he gives her because he can't think of an excuse not to.
Right.
And then she has driven around by her 100-eyed henchman Argus. We set up another starlet who gets to see the full Zeus in the Semele mode. And then the sense is, both that Hera knows how far she can go with these plots, and Zeus sort of enjoys it too. It's a little bit of the game they play, a little bit of the love language.
Sure.
And sort of the culmination is the birth of Heracles and his torments, again, seen through Hera's eyes.
Right.
But you realize that she's actually not trying to kill him. She's just trying to set these tests up, and her purpose is to eventually bring about his apotheosis and the marriage to her daughter Hebe. And because this is a thing that actually was rumored in Greek mythology, that after Heracles and his apotheosis, in order to get Hera to relent, Zeus pledged, gave an oath to give up mortal women from then on. And so that is part of her plot there, is to get him to leave them alone.
That's right.
That's her victory of a sort. And casting, I had Eva Green as Hera, kind of pull off that sinister but beautiful plotting figure. So.
Nice.
All right.
Very good. That's got a really kind of a retro sexy feel to it. It captures a lot of that erotically charged conflict, and yet through two fully fleshed out characters. Yeah, I like it. Well, I was looking at an interpretation that was slightly different here. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of this installment that Zeus is both the god of law and order. And as such, he holds divine authority over both the policing and the prosecution of crimes. Now, as I just said, Zeus has appeared in his traditional form in many movies and video games and everything else. So as such, I suggest something a little different. I'm thinking a new spin-off of a vaunted television franchise, Law and Order Special Zeus Unit. So in this, the God of Gods, he works the hardscrabble streets of present-day New York City, seeking out crime that mortal beat detectives just cannot, detect. As we've heard earlier, Zeus is quite proficient, of course, at taking on different forms to get what he wants. And normally, he uses those abilities for his erotic escapades, but since such matters do not exist in the Law and Order universe, in this show, each installment gives us a new application of that talent for purposes of law enforcement. So perhaps he assumes the form of a pigeon and overhears a critical tip-off before a bank robbery. Maybe he takes the shape of an alleyway tire fire and gets a step closer to busting an organized crime ring. Or in a surrealistic twist, Zeus disguises himself as a switchblade and delivers an open and shut case because not only can he produce the murder weapon, he is the murder weapon. Very meta. Now, as we recall, the police are just one part of the separate yet equally important groups that represent the people in our criminal justice system. Unlike the characters in the Dick Wolf series, Zeus is responsible for both sides. So each week in my series, he's also the prosecutor who then must try each case in the second half of the show. Now, because of his shape-shifting as a detective, some episodes are going to involve prosecuting alleged crimes that are committed by other animals. So these are in the style of Law and Order, can be even ripped from the headlines. So you've got, for instance, the Subway pizza rat, accused of stealing that slice and dragging it down the stairs. Verdict, guilty. That you've got a Central Park Finch who is accused of pooping on that the racist lady who called the cops on that guy for bird watching while black. Verdict, justifiable defecation. Yeah, guilty. But most of the cases are going to remain of the human variety. So Zeus is going to have to take on a human form to be in a court of law. But as we know, he cannot go full Zeus, or it'll be too much for the judge, the jury, the mortals, anything else to handle. So each week, as prosecutor, he takes on the form of a beloved fictional attorney, cycling through the greatest hits of television and film. So the LA Law Gang, Ally McBeal, Matlock, to Perry Mason, all the way back to Atticus Finch. Every week, there's a new beloved attorney that Zeus will embody to do his prosecution. And since the justice system also requires that the accused have a vigorous and fair defense, the defense attorneys are also played by various gods, which gives us a chance to revisit the performances we've envisioned throughout this season of God versus God. So you got Robert Downey Jr. as lawyer Dionysus, you got Arnold Schwarzenegger as attorney Heracles, Jared Leto as counsel Apollo, Uma Thurman as Aphrodite Esquire, and yes, in a bizarre crossover of billions, a prosecution side cameo from Paul Giamatti as the U.S. attorney version of Cupid, CGI baby body and all. Now, I think you'll agree, the possibilities really are endless. Now, in a fitting twist, prosecutor Zeus draws every week the same judge in every case, and of course, that is Her Honor, the Queen of the Bench. That's Hera herself. Played by your casting, by Ava Green, was that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll have it over there. Perfect match. So it shows you every week at the end of the final closing scene that even though Zeus can pull the strings on both sides of the criminal justice system, in the end, as is so often the case, Hera ultimately calls the shots. So that is Law and Order Special Zeus Unit, coming on NBC on the one night that doesn't have a Law and Order installment already. It still exists.
All right.
I even put the lightning bolt at the end to make it extra Zeusy. So a couple of different takes, I would say. Yeah. I think both some pretty compelling television and film there.
Yeah, very different. Very different. Yeah, how to judge this one? So I think I'm gonna give it to Hera on this one. I think the sort of have the seeing things from her side is a new perspective on those traditional myths, and also seeing sort of that charged relationship between them of love and hate, going back and playing out, sort of goes with the theme of this whole show that we've put together here.
Yes, so. I will double that vote. I think yours makes for a much more sophisticated telling of the story. Far less absurd, a lot less in the way of talking animals and And
the
celebrity cameos.
points for talking animals always, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess that will wrap it up, will it not?
I believe it will. So we have, again, no winner. So we're going to go into our next episode, which is not going to be a head-to-head, with our 11 winners who are going to battle it out. And we're going to pick from those our top 3 each for each of our 5 categories. And they're going to receive points in descending order. We're going to put this all together. I certainly haven't thought this all the way through. I'm going to have to sit down with a spreadsheet and figure out who won each episode.
Well, and I assume we'll both be revisiting all sort of 20 plus hours of material from the beginning.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The first breath all the way till now. So we have very considered choices.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, so it'll be 2-part finale. First round we will each present our finalists, make our final argument of who among the winners should win each category. We'll then see who emerges as our top 2. And then our grand finale, part 2 of the finale, will be, as you said up front, new categories.
Yes, all new categories.
Really, really craftily decided ones. I think it's going to be quite a finale. I'm very
we're going to make sure that we get the best candidate out to help us save this troubled world.
Absolutely.
Make sure the process is pure.
If we've learned anything this week, it's the way to do that is not by rehiring the people who got us into this mess in the first place.
Yes, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
So I think Erin from Myth Monsters, go listen to her show. If you've listened to one of our episodes on a cross-country flight, you may have a little bit of time left over, and you can listen to a couple of her episodes. They're very interesting and entertaining.
Yes.
And so with that.
Yeah, don't forget the thanks to Andy Snow for the theme music. Don't forget the all the socials, the official God versus God playlist on Spotify. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends, and all that good stuff. And gear up, 2-part season finale coming up starting in a few weeks. So we'll look forward to getting back to you then. Andrew, thank you. It's been a fascinating culmination of these stories to close the regular season. And look forward to going out with a 2-part bang in the very near future.
All right.
So long, folks.
Yep.